I'm Adam,
And I'm Bubbles.
and this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way. Good morning, Bubbles. How are you today?
G'day, Adam. I'm feeling positively radiant, thank you for asking. How about yourself?
Oh, just soaking up the sunshine like a sunflower. Speaking of which, have you noticed how the sun seems extra bright today?
I was just telling my feathered friends, during our morning bird watching session, that the sun seems to have turned up the brightness knob to 11.
It does seem that way. Maybe the sun's been hitting the gym lately, bulking up on those rays.
Getting those solar gains. I bet it's all that fusion power workout.
I sometimes wonder what the sun does when it's not busy shining down on us.
I imagine it's got a pretty hot social life. Hanging out with other stars, throwing solar flares parties.
Sounds like a real star-studded affair. In today's book, there's a biography about the writer Zora Neale Hurston. Zora was a girl who hankered for tales like bees for honey. Now her mama always told her that if she wanted something to jump at the sun, because even though you might not land quite that high, at least you get off the ground. Let's get started. Jump at the Sun, the true life tale of unstoppable storycatcher Zora Neale Hurston by Alicia D. Williams. Illustrated by Jacqueline Alcántara. In a town called Eatonville, a place where magnolias smelled even prettier than they looked, oranges were as sweet as they were plump, and people just plain old got along, lived a girl who was attracted to tales like mosquitoes to skin. Zora was her name. Zora got to loving tales from hearing the townsfolk swap stories at Joe Clark's general store. Oftentimes, Mama sent her over to fetch a little sugar or salt, and Zora would stall, make a 10-minute errand last an hour, just to overhear tales like how the trickster Brer Rabbit always got the best of Brer Fox. Only thing pulled her away was Mama calling, "Zora, if you don't come here, you better." Let me tell you how come we got squinch owls. You know old Miss Marster had old maid sister that never been married? That's the reason the dog is mad with the rabbit now, 'cause he fooled the dog. Y'all been telling and lying about these varmints, but you ain't yet spoke about the high chief boss in which the world, which is the lion. When there were no errands to run and Zora couldn't get an earful of tales, she'd make up her own. She'd fashion dolls from scraps she'd found. A loose doorknob became Reverend Doorknob. The Do Not Touch Pear's scented soap was carved into Mr. Sweetsmell. Ears of corn were hewed into Ms. Cornshuck and Ms. Corncob. Zora had stories to tell, and stories needed characters. "Hello, Reverend Doorknob." "Smelling good, Mr. Sweetsmell." "Thank you kindly." "Hello to you, Miss Cornshuck." And when Mama sent Zora and her stories out of the house, Zora'd perch herself atop their gatepost, calling out to travelers, "Don't you want me to go a piece of the way with you?" If a car stopped, Zora climbed right in. She'd have those people laughing like she was storytelling on Joe Clark's porch herself. Then half a mile or so later, she'd hop out and stroll on home. Now, back then, some folks called storytelling telling lies, and if Zora's preaching papa got home from church and caught her spouting them, he'd give chase lightning quick. Even Zora's grandma aimed to sting her backside, but never could, not with Mama's arms stretched wide as tree limbs. Truth was, Mama approved of Zora's storytelling. She didn't fancy the idea of her children tilling land, so she encouraged Zora to jump at the sun. You might not land on the sun, but at least you get off the ground. Well, fact is, Zora clung to those words tighter than Brer Fox would have clung to Brer Rabbit if he'd ever been able to catch him. Zora needed him too, because one day, Mama got herself a chest cold that wouldn't get better. Then one September evening, Mama closed her eyes for the last time. Zora and her sister and brothers were so sobbing-hearted that even the house seemed to mourn. 2 days later, Zora's only sister and an older brother headed back to school. Papa was already on the road preaching. His boys seemed manageable, but his tell-telling girl was too much for him to worry about. So 2 weeks after the funeral, he shipped Zora off to Florida Baptist Academy boarding school. Zora dug her nose into books, intent on reaching the sun. It was what Mama had always taught her to do, after all. Then her papa got a new wife who was stingier than a peacock. Zora's stepmother tight-fisted their money, school fees went unpaid, and back to Eatonville Zora went. To hear Zora tell it, back home, the walls were gummy with gloom, with her little brothers in ragged, dirty clothes. This was wrong, and Zora made it known. Fussing and fighting commenced from the kitchen to the gatepost. Finally, her stepmother pointed to the door, and out stomped 14-year-old Zora down the dusty road. Though friends spared a pallet for sleeping, there wasn't time for Zora to be pondering the capers of Briar Rabbit. She had to earn her keep, but she was better at storytelling than holding a job. She was fired from maid jobs for reading the employees' books instead of cleaning. She up and quit babysitting her oldest brother's children when he quit on his promise to let her go back to school. For 12 long years, she traveled from job to job, from Florida to Baltimore, in and out of schools. Zora was miserable, except for when she was spooned out Eatonville trickster tales to whoever would sop them up. And sakes alive, folks were hungry.
I love to exercise my imagination.
Exercise the imagination, you say? How so?
Well, just picture it, me, a massive elephant with binoculars, tiptoeing through the bushes, trying not to scare off the little birdies. It's like a scene from a comedy movie.
I can definitely imagine that. You know, I think you might have stumbled upon a new career path. Elephant ornithologist.
I like the sound of that. Professor Bubbles, the renowned elephant ornithologist, at your service. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some serious bird watching to do.
All right, Professor Bubbles. Don't forget to take notes for your research journal.
Of course, Adam. And who knows, maybe one day we'll uncover the mysteries of why birds really do sing in the morning.
I look forward to reading your groundbreaking discoveries, Professor. The sun, however, was getting antsy waiting on Zora, so he called down saying, "Ain't you supposed to be meeting me up here?" Reckon Zora was getting antsy too. How was Zora to jump all the way to the big old yellow? By doing what made her happiest. And Zora was happiest at school and hearing those stories. In Baltimore, 26-year-olds couldn't go to public school for free, so Zora told a tale of her own. She chopped her age to 16, then plunked herself down in a high school classroom. Even though she had a lot less money than the other students, Zora walked through the halls like her shoes were lined with gold. That girl was back in school. Woo-wee! The sun waited patiently for 2 more years until she graduated, then called out, "Jump, Zora!" So she did, to Howard University. The best part? All those years of tearing around Joe Clark's and making up tales out of corn husks paid off. She shared her tales with the director of the Stylist, the college literary club, and was offered membership. Zora not only wrote for their magazine, but the door opened to other events where she met successful writers like W.E.B. Du Bois, who wrote a book she loved, The Souls of Black Folk. Soon she got to thinking, I want to be a famous author too. So Zora jumped again. She got herself a typewriter, and her fingers got to tapping, and all her Eatonville memories poured into them pages. One of her stories was even about a little girl sitting atop a gatepost. Though Zora loved her schooling, she found she loved writing more. And at that time, new writers who wanted to get published went to one place. So in January 1925, Zora made her way to New York City. As in Eatonville, folks welcomed her. During the day, she listened to book discussions at the library or lectures at the YMCA. Come nighttime, Zora'd be swinging in Harlem, where Count Basie or Fats Waller pounded on the piano and folks danced at Charleston. Once her feet were too sore for one more kick, Zora would hold court, surrounded by writers like Arna Bontemps. Fanny Hurst, and her best pal Langston Hughes. Langston's poetry jumped at the sun for sure. If Zora's stories held the ears of the great writers, surely her mama was right that Zora could really reach the sun too. You know, God did not make folks all at once. He made folks sort of in his spare time. For instance, one day he called everybody and gave out feet and eyes. Another day he gave out toenails. You know, all the animals was having a ball down in the pine woods. The dog said it'd be a trumpet and the band, and the horse and the frog and the mockingbird all be there to help, but they didn't have no bass drum. Once, way back yonder before the stars fell, animals used to talk just like people. That spring, Zora jumped again. She mailed a handful of stories to a magazine's literary contest. Her words were so alive that the judges saw the moss on the trees, smelled the sawgrass in the Everglades, and heard the men chanting on the railroad. Then those judges began chanting Zora's name. Honorable mention short story Black Death by Zora Neale Hurston. Honorable mention play Spears by Zora Neale Hurston. Second place fiction award Spunk by Zora Neale Hurston. Second place drama award Color Struck by Zora Neale Hurston. A fancy college heard about Zora's storytelling and offered her admission, but if there was one thing Zora had learned, it was that school was expensive, and she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Zora was doubtful. "Jump, Zora," Mama's words sang. And wouldn't you know it, her jumping paid off. Barnard College offered her a scholarship. It wasn't much, but friends helped out. And Zora put together a collection of tales from home called the Eatonville Anthology and earned a bit from that. For the first time in all her schooling, Zora was able to stay in school. For her very last semester, Zora had one big project left to do: fieldwork for her anthropology class. Anthropology is the study of humans and their behavior. Her professor, Dr. Boas, suggested that Zora collect Negro folklore. Today we're going to make the most fantastical story ever told. Are you ready?
I've been waiting for this all week.
So, picture this. In a land far away, there's a kingdom ruled by a cheese-loving dragon named Gouda. And who's his trusted advisor?
How about a wise old tortoise who's always late because he stops to snack on strawberries along the way?
Brilliant! And Gouda's sworn enemy is none other than a unicorn with an attitude problem.
Oh, I love it. But wait, the unicorn has a secret weakness. He's terribly allergic to daisies.
Perfect. Now, what quest shall our heroes embark upon?
They must journey to the Forbidden Forest to retrieve the legendary bubblegum sword, guarded by a mischievous band of squirrels who love to prank travelers.
That's genius! Now, how will they navigate through the forest?
They'll ride on the back of a giant ladybug who's afraid of heights.
This is great, but before we finish, let's go back to this book real quick. Now, folklore includes stories and beliefs passed down from generation to generation, exactly like the ones told at Joe Clark's. Shucks, Dr. Boas, might as well ask Zora to go down to Joe Clark's for some sugar. And that Briar Fox threw Briar Rabbit right into the thicket. There once was this fella named John Henry. Now, he wasn't no ordinary man, you see. Just 'cause he drank up his water? She had heard Briar Rabbit's adventures and why the squinch owl screeched since she was a baby. How many lumps of sugar she had fetched to hear about High John the Conqueror, or how many dimes had her mama called Zora. Of course she'd go collect some stories. What's a squinch owl? Now, it's a loud screeching owl that once was a... Zora looked up at the sky. "I'm coming for you, son." And the sun smiled down. I know. Zora drove into Eatonville, and even after she'd been gone for 22 years, the townsfolk still recognized her. Well, if it ain't Zora Hurston. They rattled off questions before she could even answer them. "You gonna stay a while?" "Several months." "Where you going to stay?" "I reckon. What are you up to?" Come to..." Zora at last sat on Joe Clark's store porch. The townsfolk ate gingerbread, drank buttermilk, and commenced to woofing about John and the Frog, the man who went to heaven, and Jack and the Devil. As the menfolk plucked their guitar strings, it's said that even the moon dipped lower to get an earful of tales. But outside of Eatonville, folks zipped up their lips to the meddling stranger with a notebook and northern accent. To ease their minds, Zora spun a believable tale about her own self. I'm a bootlegger running from the law. The folks then trusted she wasn't just snooping and offered her a treasure of folktale. Went down to the river, heard a mighty racket, nothing but a bullfrog pulling off his jacket. It was a man, and he was so big and fat till he went to whip his little boy for something. The little boy run up under his papa's belly and hid under there for 6 months. I'm telling this lie on the gator. Well, the gator was a pretty white varmint with black coal eyes, so one day he was laying up in the grass in the marsh, sunning himself and sleeping, while Briar Rabbit came busting across his marsh right down over Briar Gator. Zora's college project became one of her biggest jumps. Even after she graduated, she didn't stop collecting tales. She trekked all the way from Alabama to New Orleans to Haiti and the Bahamas, gathering as much folklore as a leopard has spots. And then she stopped jumping long enough to take her notebooks and tapes and find herself a home in Eau Gallie, Florida. There, on her porch with papers spread out, Zora took her biggest jump ever. She set up her typewriter, and her fingers got to tapping all those tales into books. Then she tapped up her very own stories and made her own books too. Zora, like her mama, always dreamed of reaching the sun. And now, when you open those books, it's as if you're visiting on Zora's porch, just like the porch visits all those years ago. She'd have offered you a chair and filled you full of High John the Conqueror tales, or told you the talking mule lies she got from Florida railroad workers. Of course, she woof about that old Briar Rabbit and Briar Fox too. And that sun would have beamed down mightily pleased just to listen. Okay, our dragon and tortoise are trying to make it past the band of pranking squirrels to get to the legendary bubblegum sword, all while riding the back of a giant ladybug.
This is getting better and better.
And as they journey, they encounter a tribe of singing frogs who hold the key to unlocking the sword's power.
Yes. And when they finally reach the sword, they realize it's actually made of bubblegum, and they have to defeat a giant bubble-blowing ogre to claim it.
Brilliant twist, Bubbles. And as they triumphantly return to the kingdom, they're hailed as heroes and celebrated with a banquet of, pizza topped with marshmallows.
That sounds deliciously absurd. And then they all lived happily ever after, with plenty of cheese, strawberries, and bubblegum to go around.
Exactly. Oh, Bubbles, our imagination make the best story makers, don't they?
Absolutely, Adam. Who needs reality when you've got imagination this wild, just like Zora Neale Hurston?
And if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'm Adam.
And I'm Bubbles.
And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way. Author's note. I remember when I first met Zora. I was in college studying in the library. My friend, only a table over, giggled and giggled. She'd get quiet and then giggle again. Finally I got up from my seat and found out what was so funny. She held up a book by Zora Neale Hurston, and she later gifted me the anthology. I love myself when I'm laughing, and then again when I'm looking mean and impressive. This book is in my collection to this very day. Zora Neale, without the E, was born in Notasulga, Alabama on January 7, 1891, to sharecropping parents John Hurston and Lucy Potts Hurston. In 1892, the family moved to a newly established Eatonville, Florida, and from there, Zora's life became a journey of adventures. It was deeply inspiring to learn of this unstoppable storycatcher who'd hopped onto her Ford coupe, aptly named Sassy Susie, and traveled throughout the South's back roads during a time of lynching and Jim Crow laws. Zora similarly traversed the deepest parts of Haiti, Jamaica, and the Bahamas and amassed cultural songs, dances, tales, religious practice, and children's games. so that we all may enjoy them today. If it is true that we learned from our ancestors, then her folklore collection is a vast treasure of knowledge. Novelists, folklorists, and anthropologists were not Zora's only roles. During the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt initiated the Works Progress Administration, a program that employed millions of job seekers and artists. In 1935, Zora was a dramatic coach for the Federal Theater Project, and in 1939, she worked for the Federal Writers Project. She was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship to study in the West Indies. Zora also established a dramatic arts program for educator and civil rights activist Mary Aloud Bethune's College, Bethune-Cookman College, and taught drama at North Carolina College for Negroes, which is now named North Carolina Central University. And in 1939, Morgan State College awarded Zora with an honorary Doctor of Letters. Zora garnered numerous awards for her plays, articles, musical reviews, and novels, yet she never received the financial gains that she deserved. In her later years, she worked as a librarian, substitute teacher, and even a maid to survive. After suffering a stroke in 1959, she was forced to move into St. Lucie County Welfare Home. On January 28, 1960, Zora died from hypertensive heart disease and was buried with an unmarked grave. In 1973, beloved author Alice Walker located Zora's grave and honored her with a tombstone with the inscription, "A genius of the South, novelist, folklorist, anthropologist." 60 years later, Zora's writings are still being published. In 2018, by Raccoon, the story of The Last Black Cargo, comprising her 1927 interviews with Cudjoe Lewis, the last survivor of the last known American slave ship, was finally published. Zora Neale Hurston is indeed a national treasure. I hope you, dear reader, will fall in love with Zora and her tales just as I have. I would like to thank Dr. Carla Holloway, professor, author, and Zora Neale Hurston scholar, for generously reading my manuscript.
Did you know jumping can increase your metabolic rate? Research has shown that jumping increases your metabolic rate, helping your body process nutrients faster and more efficiently. It can also boost your mood by causing your brain to produce more dopamine.